Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, we sit down with the Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, Lloyd Karmeirer. We ask Chief Justice Karmeirer about the issues he's looking to address as he heads the court, how technology is changing the practice and application of the law, and whether Illinois has a funding crisis of the court system. We'll also ask him about other topics concerning the state's legal system. Then in 50 minutes, Democrat U.S. Representative Sherry Burtos speaks at the City Club of Chicago about what she sees as a growing disconnect between the Democrat Party and blue-collar voters, and what problems this may cause for the party in the future. And finally, in about 1 hour and 30 minutes, Republican House Minority Leader Jim Durkin speaks at the City Club of Chicago and gives a review of the legislative session and the process to pass school funding reform and bills to combat gun violence in Illinois. Leader Durkin also talks about the growing bipartisan work in the House and Senate. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members.
Hello, I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. Most people never look at a school and think of it being an economic enterprise that spends tens of millions of dollars every year. They look at the school as a place their children attend for education, or perhaps as a place to attend a local sporting event. But handling the business of education is the job of the school business officials. We're the ones that keep track of the millions of dollars that come in and go out. Our members face a myriad of issues that include financing new buildings, paying teachers and staff, tracking our pension costs, and supervising the many businesses that contract with local schools. And that's why I'm so happy to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel connects us with legislators working on educational issues in the state capitol, as well as covering educational issues being discussed at conferences around the state. As we see in the debate over pensions, the many details involved in just that one issue, we need a news organization that's willing to give enough time to cover an important issue in depth. I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us connected to the issues that matter most.
Next, from Springfield, we sit down with the Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, Lloyd Karmeirer. We ask Chief Justice Karmeirer about the issues he's looking to address as he heads the court, how technology is changing the practice and application of the law, and whether Illinois has a funding crisis of the court system. We'll also ask him about other topics concerning the state's legal system. This runs about 50 minutes.
Chief Justice Lloyd Karmeirer, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a while since we had a chance to get together. We were just talking right before we started here. It's hard to believe that it was 2004, the last time we did the first time we did our first interview, when you were first running for the Supreme Court, and you won an election that was kind of a nasty race, actually. But we appreciate you joining us, and now you are here sitting as the Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, having taken that office October of 2016.
That's correct. It just goes to show you that if you live long enough, sometimes good things happen.
One of the things the Chief Justice does, and maybe we ought to say, what do you do as a Chief Justice versus other justices? But one of the things, as I understand it, is you have some items that you might want to focus on as the Chief. What are some of the issues that you look to address in your term?
As I indicated at the outset, my primary goal is to continue the programs that have been started in the past. Access to Justice by Chief Justice Kilbride, Justice Garman got very involved with e-filing, and we're closing in on that now. As we go along, other things come up that catch my attention, and we'll focus on those. But it's really trying to complete things. I have no specific agenda, nothing that I am worried about leaving as my mark on the court, other than trying to do a good job and leading the court in the right direction.
We'll talk about some of the issues as we can, and the viewers hopefully understand there's certain things you can't comment on, nothing that would be coming before the court. But also we want to talk about process. Let's talk about the process of the Supreme Court. How often do you meet, and when do you meet?
Our court meets beginning on the second Mondays of September, November, January, March, and May. The term is either 2 or 3 weeks, depending upon the time that we need to complete. I, as the Chief Justice, am responsible for setting the agenda, the matters that will come before the court. The clerk sets the cases that are ready for oral argument. If we're not in term, if we're not here in Springfield where we meet all together, we do all of our primary grunt work, the research, the reading in our own chambers with our own staff. And our chambers are back in each of our respective districts.
And I know from when the Illinois Channel has covered some of the cases in this courtroom that we sit in the Supreme Court chamber in Springfield, there are certain days when you'll hear 2 cases, certain days when you'll hear 4 cases. How do you prepare for that? And I should say, too, I remember some cases where the amount of evidence would be piled up here on the desk where you all sit, where we could hardly see you as justices, because it would be literally a foot of paperwork sitting in front of you.
We always have all of the briefs on the bench in front of us. Until recently, each justice had his or her own set of briefs, because so many of us have gone to reading briefs either online, digitally, or on our iPads. We don't all have those, but we still have them stacked up there. All of us will have read all of the briefs, the replies, anything that we need. We've also had our staff go over some of the cases for us in advance. And I have a pretty good idea of some of the questions that I may want to ask. But I find that as the oral arguments go along, and that's why I think there's value to oral arguments, trying to clarify what's being presented in the briefs, what the lawyers are trying to get to, is very helpful by the questions that are asked from the bench. The other thing that the questions, I think, help do is it helps clarify for my fellow justices, for each other, the questions that are being asked, some points that maybe we need to focus on.
I was going to say, when you read the briefs, in your experience, has it been your experience that when you come into hear the oral arguments, do you have, I would imagine in certain cases, you've already maybe kind of formed an opinion about the legal issues involved and how you might rule? What role does the listening to the oral arguments here play versus reading the briefs and the homework you would do on a case?
Before I comment on that, I want to remind you what it says on above the door. It says, "Audi alteram partem," hear the other side, which means we should not have formed an opinion yet as to what our ultimate conclusion is going to be. Certainly by reading the briefs, and I take this also from one of my predecessors, Justice Rarick would say, "Well, I read the appellant's brief. Yeah, I think he's right or she's right. But then I read the appellee's brief. Yeah, I think they're right." But that's what gets us to the oral arguments, because you've got good lawyers generally filing very good briefs on the points of law. They're usually accurate on the presentation of the facts, sometimes not, and through the process of oral arguments, we can question what's actually in the record that went before the trial court and the appellate court, and what the lawyers are just saying they wish were in the record, something that they might allude to in their briefs. The other value of oral arguments, we may have a pretty good notion of what we believe are the important issues in the case, but occasionally, by the time we get to oral argument, the lawyers will have changed and maybe concede a point based upon either additional research or what have you. That always surprises me, but it does help us then at the end of the day to focus on what's remaining as the salient issue.
And as you then have read the briefs, you've heard the oral arguments. At a certain point, then, you will sit down with your fellow justices around a conference room table and discuss the case, as I understand. Is that
That's
more or
correct.
less the process?
Immediately after oral argument, usually at the conclusion of any number that we have during the day. Today, for example, we had 3. We'll go back into the conference room and we'll take an impression vote. An impression vote does not tie anyone to absolutely saying that's the way I would vote whenever the opinion is circulated. But it helps us formulate, those of us who are assigned to writing an opinion, what direction the court might go. And during the course of that impression vote and before, the authoring justice can certainly ask questions and say, now what do you think about this issue? Or should it be decided on this issue or on another? And help focus where the court goes. There are times when we'll get a case and the impression vote is all one way and the ultimate decision may go the other. That's not the norm, but that does happen. Because after we have oral arguments and we get the cases back to our own respective chambers, additional research, in-depth research, is done by our staff, and then we start to draft an opinion. And by the time we have that done and circulated, everyone is much more familiar with the case and the issues than they were even at the time of oral argument.
You know, one of the things I'm kind of fascinated about, on one hand we say the law is the law. It's written right there in black and white, right? And yet you have good lawyers who are sitting on the appellate court, good lawyers arguing the case before the Supreme Court, people who are good lawyers before they were elected to the Illinois Supreme Court, and you'll have differences of opinion. If the law is the law, how do we have these variations of opinion on what the law means?
Some of that starts with what the legislature does. And we had a night when we had oral arguments with the legislators here last year, and they were surprised that we looked at the legislative debates on what the legislators intended, because sometimes those laws are not very clear what is actually meant. And we'll look at the debates. And of course that's a fertile area for a difference of opinion as to what a law might mean. And it always surprises me, as long as I've been practicing law and been a judge, that there can always still be issues that have to be decided. It seems to me, after this amount of time, we should have everything taken care of and everything categorized, but we don't. Today, we had an oral argument, and I won't get into any details, but a question was asked of one of the lawyers, has this been an issue in the past? And the lawyer said, no, it's always been assumed that was the law. And the other lawyer then said, well, I wasn't the trial lawyer, but so I can't take credit for this, asking for this interpretation, but it's something that is a case of first impression and one that we need to resolve. So it becomes an important issue, not only for that case, but for going forward.
And that's, we should also point out, I mean, the other thing you will look at is what is the legal precedence from previous case law of how it was decided by other courts?
We do that. We look to our case law as a precedent. And we won't overrule that unless there's good reason to do that. We believe in the principle of stare decisis. If it's been decided, it should stay, unless there's a principled reason for change. And that can come from change in circumstances, change in what's going on in the world. Sometimes a poorly reasoned case because in the past, because the lawyers may not have focused on that issue, and it kind of got to be, I don't want to say a throwaway issue in an opinion, but it may not have been the important issue, but opinion commented on something. And once that's there, and if it has meaning in the case, it becomes the law, and we have to follow that. We do change, and when we do, we say why we're changing it. We look to appellate court opinions for the rationale that they might use in deciding a case, and sometimes say that's a perfect rationale, and we'll adopt that. But we're not bound by appellate court opinions. Of course, as far as interpretation of the U.S. Constitution is concerned, we are bound by what the U.S. Supreme Court says. However, we get to interpret the Illinois Constitution, and the U.S. Supreme Court will follow our interpretation unless there's a conflict between Illinois and federal law or our constitutions.
We might say, of course, this would be true of probably every state, but I mean a number of the cases then that you would decide on over the years, you as a court could go up then to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it could be appealed to them as the final arbitrator of that. So I don't know if you happen to know offhand, do you know how the record is of the Illinois Supreme Court vis-a-vis the U.S. Supreme Court, if you're being upheld mostly? Or?
It's fairly good. There was a case called Escobedo versus Illinois, which was 2 years before Miranda versus Arizona, which changed
1964.
64, 66, that era, yes. And the Illinois Supreme Court wrote an opinion in Escobedo versus Illinois that was really overruled by the U.S. Supreme Court, having to do with voluntariness of confessions and that type of thing. And the Miranda warnings, of course, came out of the Miranda case. But since then, there aren't a lot of cases that have gone up. I think I've had only one in the years I've been on the court, and they affirmed, which I was very pleased to see, of course. There was one that had to do with search and seizures and dog sniffing that was decided before I got on the court in a 4-3 decision, and the Supreme Court said the sniff was okay. The minority, I think
it was a question of unreasonable search and seizure.
Right.
Highway 55, someone was pulled over. They brought out the dogs and sniffed out the drugs, and they said that was a violation of the Fourth Amendment protections.
I think that's right. And when does the stop become unreasonable? Is it prolonging? And it was directed at that. Cabalas was the name of that case.
Going back along the theme of how do we decide, how do we take ourselves as humans, and we form these courts, and you say, so one of the guidelines we've talked about, how are the laws written within the Illinois legislature? What was the original intent? Now, sometimes a case might come to you that's municipal law arises. Do you actually go back and look at the judgment of how it was argued at an aldermanic level?
I don't recall that we've had that. Now, we've had some, especially it's usually Chicago municipal ordinances, and we have that. I don't recall that we've seen a record of the aldermen there arguing. Of course, we have some rules of statutory construction which apply to municipal law construction, and that is, first of all, the meaning should be plain from the language itself. And if it isn't, then you look at the intent, what it looks like the intent has, what the entire statute is directed at, and we do get into the legislative debates. However, those can be used a couple different ways. If one senator or representative gets up and says, this is what the law means, that's one senator saying that. It's not the entire body. If there's debate about it, that helps us because it's more indicative of what the intent or what the law was intended to be.
You unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, you have 7 justices on the Illinois Supreme Court. You're elected to 10-year terms. Then you can run for retention. Let's take you as one example. So you started your law career when, 1964?
I was sworn into practice law in 1964. I clerked for Justice House of the Illinois Supreme Court for 4 years. I was state's attorney for 4 years, and then I was state's attorney, and one of the other members of the firm that I was in, and we were partners at that time, was state's attorney in Perry County, and we started having conflicts with what other things we could do as a private practitioner. So neither of us ran in 72, and then I practiced law until 1986 and ran for circuit judge.
And when you practiced law, was it a mix, all civil, or was it a mix of civil and criminal?
It was mostly civil. It was a small firm. We had about 10 partners at one time in 3 towns, Nashville, Pinckneyville, and DuQuoin, which was a little unusual, but down in southern Illinois, it helped to have an office in the town to attract the clientele. We did a lot of municipal work, a lot of school work, We built water lines throughout the country, and we built schools. And if we had a personal injury case, we usually associated with a personal injury specialist because we didn't do that much trial work. Traffic tickets occasionally, very little in the domestic violence. Nobody wanted to do divorces.
Now, you know, one of the things I think is interesting, we know who follow politics. I mean, you look at the Illinois legislature, it is controlled by those from Chicago. That's where the votes are. 2/3 of the legislature is from the Chicagoland area. Whereas the Supreme Court, the way it's structured, you have the different districts. And so here you are as the Chief Justice from Southern Illinois in a rather rural area.
That's correct.
So I think it's, in some ways, I wanted to say more democratic. I suppose one could argue that, but how does it, you know, we have other justices. This is Justice Burke is from the Chicagoland area. How does your background, and you knowing the people from, you're from Nashville, a small little town, but you know the people in that area. You know the heart of those people from your part of the state, as I would say Justice Burke and the other justices would from their districts. What part does that play when you hear the trials, and maybe you can relate to something different than someone else does, when you sit down and have your conferences and debate how the case might go? I don't want to make too much of it, but does that play a role that you represent different parts of the state?
I think we all bring different perspectives to the court, or somebody might say different baggage to the court. I think a perspective, none of us as we get into a case have a preconceived notion of how cases should go. But I think where you were brought up, how you were brought up, who you associate with, all of that thing goes into our makeup, and it goes into our how we're going to interpret the law and how we see different cases. We heard a case on oil and gas this week, and that's very big in Southern Illinois. It was not high. I mean, it was not such a big ticket item with the Cook County justices, but it is an important case, and they all agreed to it. But it isn't the kind of thing. They don't have oil wells in Cook County.
You know, we talked a little bit about some of the items that the other Chief Justices preceding you had done. Justice Kilbride had focused on cameras in the courtroom. He was saying Justice Karmeirer, Garman, thank you. I was going to say Danville. Yeah. Garman on e-filings. All these different businesses, anyone who's in business knows how technology over the last 25, 30 years has changed the way we've done business. We know from our homes. We may have our recipes on a laptop these days instead of all these different cookbooks. How, if in any way, is technology changing the practice of the law and maybe the application of the law?
Well, I can start with what's happened in our courts and how that's changed and how it's made it much more convenient. We get now most of our PLAs, petitions for leave to appeal, the briefs, although we get hard copies, we get them electronically, we get them faster, and we have immediate access to the records that the clerk's office maintains here. They're all online. All of us in my office and every office can look at the record of the case. I have downloaded onto my iPad every term all of the cases, all of the briefs, all of the research memos and the things my staff does, so that I don't have to carry the briefs with me when I want to read, and I do a lot of reading as I travel. That's from the court end of it. Now, it seems to me, of course I'm not practicing law, it seems to me that lawyers would find that same thing, that convenience factor of carrying a laptop, being able to do work or add work, send it to his or her secretary, be ready to file, and then right now under the e-filing system, being able to file once they've approved a document. If they're in Cook County, they can file the document in Washington County. It has to change it. I think it's going to change all of it for the better because of access. We are concerned that for indigent or self-represented litigants that don't have or may not have as much access to computers or to a kiosk at a courthouse, it might be difficult to file, but they do have that same difficulty with paper filing. With lawyers, I think emailing has been a blessing and a bane. I think it's been a blessing because it memorializes conversations in writing that might otherwise take place by phone, and then the lawyers have to rely on their recollection of what they agreed to, didn't agree to. If they put it into an email, it's there. The problem with emails, I've noticed, is sometimes people respond to other emails quickly and without a lot of thought that they would put into a letter, and really trying to reason and may say some things they wish they hadn't. So, but I think that's changing. I think people are finding out emails are being maintained, and you make copies of them for your paper files. So I haven't heard any lawyers really say they don't like e-filing. I've talked with lawyers who have virtually paperless office, which would scare me right now, but I think it's going to be a thing of the future. How long those e-records last and what medium they're stored in, all of that are still things that we don't know. What were the photographs? I can't think of the term. The things, the reels they had. They used to put everything on
microfiche?
Microfiche, yeah. That's it. That's so far gone now.
Yeah.
And so, they went to discs. Is that the end all? Is it thumb drives, or what is it? It's changing so rapidly.
Well, and I suppose as we get into the non-physical display of evidence, in the day of photoshopping, then you don't necessarily know if something has been altered or not. But I do know that some of the courtrooms around the state are also becoming updated electronically, so now they might show a photograph. Several years ago, when we were covering the mid-year conference up in Chicago, there was a panel discussion by one of the attorneys, and she was saying, as you described a worker being injured by falling down the stairs, it was one thing to verbally tell a jury, but when you could have the photograph to go back and take and show the actual physical layout, how much more compelling. As we all say, a picture tells 1,000 words. Right. So her point was that was one of the great ways that technology was adding to the understanding of cases, or the ability to present their side of the case. One of the things that I've been concerned with over the years, and I know in talking with some of the other justices, is the cost of going to court, the cost of just meeting with a lawyer. And again, you practice law, so on one hand you want to get paid, you want to be able to make a living at your profession. But I've often thought that the judicial branch is one of the 3 branches of government. We can go talk to our lawmaker and we don't have to pay them. There might be someone we talk to in the executive branch. But when we bump into the judicial branch, we always have to be writing a check, because typically it's going to start with a lawyer. Are you concerned, either as an individual or as the process, let's maybe more on the process, how concerned should we all be as citizens as to what extent is justice denied or delayed by what can be a very expensive process of going to the judicial system?
I think it's a real concern, and we're trying to address that. The number of self-represented litigants is growing every year.
For that very reason.
For that very reason. The cost of access to an attorney, access to the courts, and that's the thing that we're always concerned with when we talk about imposition of fees. Legislature for years has loved to add on fees to different things because it helps to support the court system. But it chills access to the court system at the same time. We have, through our Access to Justice Commission, which is part of the Administrative Office of the Illinois Courts, they have prepared and making available online forms that self-represented litigants can use. Not sophisticated lawsuits. If it is a sophisticated thing, they're going to need a lawyer, and they're going to be able to afford that, or a lawyer will take the case. But on a lot of things, on mortgage foreclosures or small claims type thing, where people want their dispute litigated by an impartial individual, we have to make sure that they have access. Another way that I think we're helping that is through the limited scope representation. We're lawyers who, if a person comes into a lawyer's office and says, I can't afford to hire you for this case, but I've written out my complaint, what does that look like? Can you help me put it in right words? A lawyer can do that now and not be responsible for the entire litigation. You have to have a limited scope representation agreement, and that helps.
How long has that been around?
Within the last year, and I don't know the exact date that we adopted, but I think within the last year. The thing that helps, it helps the litigants, but it helps the court too, because one of the harder jobs for judges and circuit clerks is how much help do you give a self-represented litigant without appearing to advise them, legally advise them about things. And it slows down the process if you've got a litigant who can't tell his or her story in court if they have help in filling out these forms. I guess sometimes it's surprising to me. We went through this period a few years ago when new law students, lawyers getting out of law school, couldn't get a job. And maybe they couldn't afford to do some of the legal work because the debt they accrued was so enormous. But it seems if we have a glut of lawyers, we should have lawyers who would be able to help out people who could not afford the $200, $300, $400, $500 an hour lawyers that are more prevalent in the larger cities, I believe.
In fact, I recently spoke with John Thies, who's an attorney over in Champaign, former head of the Illinois Bar Association. And he, like you, practiced general practice in a smaller community. I mean, Champaign-Urbana, as compared to a Chicago or a St. Louis, let's say. But he was concerned. He said that when new lawyers would, in the past, as he did, and say as you did, come out and start practicing, you would have a fairly good range of cases. And when these students, as you say now, or these lawyers graduate, they're looking to be making some big dollars, starting maybe at a 70, 80, or so thousands of dollars a year, because they are so burdened with their cases. But he said for the practice of law, they're often pigeonholed in a larger firm where they just do one thing and do it repeatedly, and that they don't get the grounding that they used to get. So to that extent, I don't know if you had a thought or concern about it as well.
Well, I think that's true. I've always considered myself fortunate in being able to start out the practice clerking for a justice and then going into a firm that had a diverse practice. Again, we didn't do personal injury or a lot of marital things after the first 10 years or so. But I had great mentors in the members of the firm and, of course, Justice House, who would help me along the way. And if I was given something or took on a client where I hadn't done it before, I had someone in the firm that had done something similar. So you could go to them, you could find out. And it made me a better lawyer, and I think it also made for a better representation of the client. One of the problems I had when I started out, I guess I assumed as a graduate from the University of Illinois, and I passed the bar, I should know the answers to everything. And it was difficult when somebody came in and say, you know, what does this mean? I would try to answer, and then I finally realized I'm dancing around the real, and I finally would say, I'm going to have to look that up. And what surprised me is the clients didn't mind that. In fact, they preferred it. I'll get back to you. And then, of course, then you better get back to them right away. But that helped me once acknowledging that you don't have all of the answers when you start out, and you can use mentors or guidance from your fellow lawyers. I've never practiced in a city firm, but I heard of people who were chored with billing so many hours and just almost abandoning family life and what have you. And I think there's a trend now to get away from that, where the law profession itself recognizes that lawyers have to take care of themselves physically and emotionally and mentally and take care of family obligations. That was one of the great things about practicing in a small town. I was a minute and a half from home.
When you look at the law, you and we should say you, not you just as an individual, but the profession, although you would also see, Every industry needs to change and adapt for a variety of reasons. We've already talked about some are technological, some are attitudinal as society changes. We're going to have all kinds of cases that one way or another are impacted by, let's say, illegal immigration, which would not have been much of an issue back if we went back to the 1960s or 50s. How does the legal system change? Is there a process for change? Is it going to these conferences and listening to people talk? I'll just throw it out. Is there anything that, if you had a magic wand, are there things you would like to see change about the judicial system? We talked about the cost of it as one, but anything else that should be changed? And should the legal system be more dynamic as far as being open to change?
I think that's probably true. I think, though, that with our, as far as the judicial system, with our judicial college that's coming into being, the educational programs that we have, when we see issues that are coming up constantly, we try to provide that education for judges. I'm the liaison for the Continuing Legal Education Board of the court, and since that was began probably about 12 years ago or so, it's become accepted by lawyers. You need to have the education, and as we saw a problem a couple of years ago where immigration lawyers were having were being less than professional in some cases and taking advantage of clients, and of course ARDC steps in then. But we saw a need then where the Continuing Legal Education Board was able to approve courses for people who wanted to practice immigration laws. I think we have to not only recognize the trends and not be a step behind, but maybe try to get out front. And one of the things that, and maybe I do have an agenda with the court, one of the things I want to stress a little bit more is strategic planning for the future. And we have a strategic planning committee that has been active for about a year or two now, but I want to take it a further step, that they really look at what's going on. And our judicial conference this October, that will be the theme. What can we do in advance of problems and see what's coming to help people? After all, if we don't provide a forum for people who have grievances or are being sued, the result is they're going to settle it themselves some way, and if they don't do it by arbitration, maybe back to the old-fashioned, let's settle it out on the street. You know, we don't want that type of thing.
Well, and then we sometimes, let's say in the civil cases, different lawsuits that might evolve involving different corporations or such, it can take years, and in the meantime, you're kind of up in the air on how that's going to be resolved while you're still trying to operate a business. I mean, so let's go to the funding of the courts. Again, the judicial branch, Justice Kilbride, when he was Chief Justice, would bring up that we're one of the three branches, and I said, but he would say we only get, I forgot what the number was, 2%?
Less than 2%.
Less than 2%.
Still is.
And I've been concerned, actually, from listening to some of his conversations, because coincidental, then we had certain cases come up around the state where there was a family that was murdered in a county not far from Sangamon County, where we are here. That one case nearly bankrupted the judicial system of that county. It was so expensive to bring to trial. Do we have a funding crisis of the court system? Do we need to look at a better business model? And I was preparing for this interview, it struck me, since we just had this similar argument with our schools. Senator Menard would point out how the downstate schools are underfunded because they're in an agricultural area or low property, and that you had the really wealthier school districts. There wasn't, so you were having inequitable education. Are we having inequitable justice because of funding at the county level, where some are just going to be destitute courts, so to speak?
It is a real problem. First of all, with regard to funding for the Supreme Court, for the judicial branch, that's part of the picture. The other is what happens in the local counties. And we have counties downstate that really are struggling, small counties like Gallatin, Polk, low population, no industries going on, very low tax base, and how to support. You can't afford to have a full-time or even a part-time public defender, perhaps. Maybe one or two people working in the clerk's office. It really is a problem. But the bigger picture for us, of course, is funding of our branch. And as Justice Kilbride so ably pointed out a number of times, we get less than 2% of the total budget.
And I might interject, to go back to your earlier comment, then we, as who go to the courts, kind of get nickel and dimed on some of the fees.
Right, and it's been a popular thing over the years to add fees. And finally, there was the commission that made a report within the last year. It came from the legislature and the courts to take a look at this myriad of fees and how they're added on and where they're found. You can find them in different parts of the statute, and so hopefully that's being clarified. But with regard to funding for the courts, we don't have the power of taxation, and we don't have police power. We are at the mercy of the legislature for funding. And as the Chief Justice, I have the pleasure to appear before the Senate Appropriations Committee and the House Appropriations Committee, and we're trying to...
And you argue for your budget that you propose.
We argue for the budget, but we argue for the idea that we are a branch of government as opposed to one of their
agencies or
that's the word I'm looking
sub-departments,
for.
right?
Yeah, and they're all. I'm not sure that everyone understands that, because sometimes I've only done this 1 year. I see a look of recognition or enlightenment come over a person's face and say, "Oh yeah, well," because the question will be asked. We've got these other agencies that we're cutting. Why isn't your agency being cutting? We're not an agency, Senator. And we are reliant on that, and you have an obligation to fund. And I think that message is getting there, but we have new senators, new representatives, and it's a constant. Our budget has been flat since 2015. First of all, because no budgets were passed for a couple of years, and this year they passed. We have a very resourceful administrative office that has allowed us to get through each of the years with that budget. We fund, our obligation on funding probation is 100%. We were at 85. I think we just increased that to 88% for the last fiscal year. We had some funds available. The biggest part of the pie, of course, is judicial salaries. Some 900 to 1,000 judges who are well paid in Illinois now. But we can't control
Do we
that.
have enough judges?
We do. I think we do. There's sometimes there may be concern on allocation of judges, where they should be, but that becomes a circuit problem, and they should be able to take care of that. The legislature provides for the number of associate judges based on population, and I think we're staffed adequately.
And has anyone, I don't know, discussed with the legislature at any point having more of a general tax, or perhaps does the court system look at saying for some of these small counties, as you mentioned, with the one clerk, and now that we're dealing with electronic documents as we are, is there some way of maybe having a core functionality for the administration of the courts so that you don't have Sally down in Polk County trying to do that by herself, but that maybe she can have 4 or 5 people or 50 people in one core place where some of this paperwork can be processed?
I don't know if that's going to happen. We have this dual funding system. The circuit clerks are paid by the counties. They're elected by counties, and so the counties want to keep control of what's happening in each of those offices. With the advent of e-filing, though, our administrative office is helping in those areas, and the legislature did give us a $9 fee, I think, that is dedicated to offsetting the costs of e-filing throughout the state of Illinois, which we can use to help each of the counties, at least initially. And there should eventually be savings in cost, even for those offices, by using e-filing. Ideally, the state if the state were to fund fully the court system, including circuit clerks, and we'd have that ability to help them, it would be better. But otherwise, but that's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen because in some counties, in some of them the larger, the fees that are generated are really help to provide funds to the county coffers. In some counties, the fees don't generate enough to take care of the needs of the county or the clerk's office.
Let me ask you this, as I've had the pleasure of being around the different justices over the years from time to time, it seems that you are all very collegial, not just the 7 current members, but as I've witnessed over the last 15 years or so. Ostensibly, there's some partisanship, but again, it doesn't seem to be, unlike certainly the legislative, where tensions can be high. But I grew up in Missouri, and people of Illinois may or may not know that not every other state elects justices to the court. They're more like the U.S. Supreme Court in many states. They're appointed. Now, in Illinois, and you're a perfect example of this, the cost of election and the amount of money that people will throw at an election either to elect someone or to defeat you, and you were, again, a prime example of this back in the retention and the initial time when you ran back in 2004. It's now cost millions of dollars to get elected to the court. And there's many critics say, you know, that's unseemly, that justices shouldn't be out with a tin cup raising money. Maybe we should have an appointed system. Do you have any thoughts on, should we change the way that we bring people to the Illinois Supreme Court?
I guess ideally, if we could find a perfect system of appointments, merit selection, that would be outstanding. I had the opportunity to appear before the Missouri Bar in St. Louis and the Bar Metropolitan Area, St. Louis Metropolitan Area Bar, I'm not sure what they call it. And Justice Mary Russell just served a term as Chief Justice of Missouri, and I were on the panels. And I knew that I was an example of what wasn't good, basically, compared to the Missouri system. But, and someone asked me the question, why don't you have your governors appoint like we do here? And I said, well, then we'd have to go to, we'd find George Ryan in prison, we'd find Blagojevich in prison, we'd find Dan Ryan in prison, and we'd find Otto Kerner in prison. Now, how many, why would we consider that we're going to have merit selection? It's a problem no matter what, even after my election. And I said at one point, you know, the amount of money that was being spent on both sides, and it was fairly even. We were within either a few thousand or less than 100,000 difference on each side. But I said the amount of money being spent on this is obscene. It creates a perception that it should not go down well. Fortunately, we can't raise funds, so I didn't know where funds came from. The general public doesn't know that. They assume that if, you know, if...
What, are there committees? How is that done?
You have to have a committee, and you can't accept contributions. And you can take a look at the donor list if you want. I never did. I didn't want to know until I had occasion to have to know whether someone had contributed, and I needed to recuse myself. But after that election, the
original or the...
The original, in 2004. I think it was the Brennan Center for Justice had someone do a survey in Illinois about the merits of merit selection, elected, and all of the answers came out, yeah, it would be good, all of that, and then the final question is, would you rather elect or have your judge appointed? And 80%, and even down in my area, 80 to 85% said elected judges. So Illinois is not going to change that. I'd take a constitutional change. Even with the 1970 Constitution, if you recall, if you were old enough to recall that, there was a separate issue on the ballot as to whether in adopting that Constitution there should be appointed or elected judges. Cook County actually voted for appointed, and the rest of the state had more than enough votes to offset that, and so we have the system we have now. The perception is really the concern, and the money has gotten bigger, and politicians have gotten involved. They see it as a way perhaps to get people who are attuned to their thought, maybe elected to courts?
Well, it begs the issue that someone is going to rule on a political basis and not the legal, narrow legal, as we talked earlier, definition of what does it say in the book, the way the law was written.
It does.
That they would rule, and then that would undermine the respect for the rule of law if within the population they think, as the governor has used the term pejoratively, politicians in robes.
As I said earlier, we as the court, the judicial branch, we do not have the power of the purse or the police power. The only thing we have is integrity and the ability to make people understand that we are ruling on the basis of the law and not on the basis of political patronage or other. If we lose that, then we have problems.
Justice Karmeirer, we appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure we could talk longer, but we'll let you go, and we appreciate you explaining all this to me, and good luck to you in the court.
It's my pleasure to be here. I think it's incumbent upon members of the judiciary, and especially the Supreme Court, to be accessible to people who may have questions like this, and I hope this helps to some degree.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members, leaders in business, education, law, medicine, and other fields from across Illinois.
Hi, I'm Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Education has never been more challenging in Illinois than it is right now, with comprehensive education reform recently passed by lawmakers and our state's financing of education remaining under pressure. That's why the Illinois Principals Association acts to represent the needs of students and our members. We keep our principals up to date on changes in the law affecting education policy, and we advocate to keep our schools safe and to maintain a healthy environment conducive to learning. With all the changes happening in every field and with the ongoing financial problems facing Illinois, it's vital we all know about changes affecting our lives. That's why the Illinois Principals Association is proud to be a part of the Illinois Channel's advisory on education. Their coverage, whether that of key lawmakers discussing changes in education, an interview with the Illinois Budget Director on the state's finances, or the one-on-one interviews with those working in education, all help to keep citizens across the state connected to the real issues that impact the education of our children. I'm Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. I'm also proud to say I serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Chicago, Democrat U.S. Representative Sherry Burtos speaks at the City Club of Chicago about what she sees as a growing disconnect between the Democrat Party and blue-collar voters, and what problems this may cause for the party in the future. This runs about 40 minutes.
Hello, Chicago. How's everybody doing? Jay, thank you very much for that introduction. Ed, thank you. LaRue and I know each other from, they've got a nice presence. UPS has a nice presence in my congressional district in Rockford. And Mush, thank you very much for all of your hard work in getting this put together. It really is an honor to be here. And I appreciate the invitation, and hello, Chicago. So I know that when you're in Chicago, it's kind of the center of the universe for the state of Illinois, right? And it's the center of the universe probably for most people here. But as you know, Illinois has 102 counties, and only one is Cook. And so there's also so much more to our economy than just what comes out of the high-rises all around us. Quiz. Anybody know what okay, some of you can't answer this because I know you know this answer. But I'll just tell you. The #1 economic driver for the state of Illinois is agriculture. It's agriculture. So a lot of people don't know that, but we've got 72,000 farms on 27 million acres. And that's an important thing to know, because not only do those farms and the farmers help drive our economic engine in the state of Illinois, but so does agribusiness. And I want to tell you a little bit about why that's important to me. And so as I stand up here, I want to give you a little geographic perspective of my congressional district and being a downstater, and also a little bit about who I am personally. So I think the vast majority of the people in this room I don't know. So I'll fill you in a little bit about who I am. I am the only Democrat in the Illinois congressional delegation outside of Chicagoland. So if you think of the map of Illinois, you've got all of the Chicagoland area tucked away in the northeast corner here, but all of the rest of it, it's all Republicans in Congress except for me. I'm also one of 12 Democrats in the entire nation that won in a district that Donald Trump won. Okay, so so we've got a leadership table that we sit around in Washington, D.C., where we make decisions for the Democratic caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. And everybody sitting around that table comes from somewhere other than the Midwest except for me. So I think I bring a little bit of a different perspective. And why that matters, I want to get into that a little bit, but it's not just because of agriculture. I am on the Ag Committee. I'm also on the Transportation Committee, which I think are great committees to represent our congressional district. But it matters because of who we are as Midwesterners. So a little bit about my personal background. As I said, I'm a downstater. I grew up in Springfield, as Jay pointed out. But I spent a lot of my summer days on my grandfather's hog farm. And this is my cousin Colleen and Brittany probably recognize this picture. But this is a view of my grandfather's farm. It's in a town called Milford, Illinois. Anybody ever go to Milford? The metropolis that it is. I saw Rich Eskolka raise his hand. A place where there are more pigs than people. But they were just absolutely wonderful memories. So that's what I would spend some of my summer days doing, going to my grandfather's farm in Milford, Illinois. My father was a newspaper reporter before he went on to work in government. And he ended up working for 2 governors, a lieutenant governor, a state treasurer, a secretary of state, and a U.S. senator. So around our kitchen table, and there are people in this room, especially at that table right back there, you guys know this very well, but around our kitchen table, we had some of the best public servants, I think, in the history of the state of Illinois, minus Abe Lincoln. So that's the lieutenant governor down there at the bottom. Anybody recognize that guy down there? So that was the lieutenant governor that my dad worked for, a guy named Paul Simon, and who actually lived with us in our house for a half a year. That's a whole other story. We can get into that later. That's my dad on the far left. But anybody recognize the guy on the far right? So that is Senator Durbin, just not too long out of law school. So it would be people like that would sit around our table and talk politics late into the night. And even as a little girl, they let me sit right next to them. And I cannot think of one time that I was ever shushed or told to go away, that it was an adult conversation. I could sit there as long as I wanted to. And I really just had one price of admission, and that was I would have to go to the refrigerator and grab my dad a Budweiser. And as long as I kept doing that, everything was fine. So fast forward, I went to school. We already talked a little bit about where I went to school, but when I graduated, I moved up to the Quad Cities. And does anybody know how many cities are in the Quad Cities? That's a trick question, but there are 5. We're a little unusual, seriously, though. So we have Moline, Rock Island, East Moline, and then on the Iowa side of the river, we have Davenport and Bettendorf. So there really are 5. And so I started there as a newspaper reporter. I covered the night cop beat. That means I covered crime. And I would go on to cover City Hall. I would go on to be an investigative reporter. This was a billboard that they had when they were promoting investigative reporting. I was an editor at one time. But in that first beat that I had, my hours were 5 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. And so I got to know a lot of the third shift cops. And so one day I got invited to this third shift party. So that means at 8 a.m. they get off work and they have a party. And I showed up 2 hours into that, so you can kind of imagine the environment. So I met a guy there. I was a rookie cop reporter and he was a rookie cop. And it was a guy named Jerry Burtos who ended up being my husband. That is us at our wedding, I know, a few years ago. So that's 30 plus years ago. We have since had 3 sons, and you know, just it all reminds me, as I was putting this together, just what a great place we live. One other fact about this third shift party, it was at a bar called the Lil Cowbell, not Little. Little was not spelled out, Lil Cowbell, where they actually have seat belts on the bar stools. So that really was that was our beginning. But it's a very blue-collar working class area, and it really is what I love so much about it. But we've also got some of the best farmland anywhere in the world in this congressional district. And when I have people who come down and visit, they remark at just how beautiful it is to drive through the farmland and see all the crops, the corn, the beans, and all of that. So just down the street from where I live right now is a little company called John Deere. And we are the world headquarters for John Deere. Combines are literally made right down the street from where I live. We also have Caterpillar in my congressional district. The birthplace of Caterpillar, you know, obviously the big yellow iconic earth-moving equipment, that was founded in my congressional district as well. So in addition to ag, we have a great manufacturing history. And you know, it tells a story about the kind of people that come from our area, because it is John Deere and places like Caterpillar that have given so many people so many opportunities. My father-in-law was literally born in a boxcar. So if you can picture that, he was born in a boxcar. That was his home when he was first born. And he didn't go past the 8th grade. He had an 8th grade education, served in World War II. But because of John Deere and because of the United Auto Workers, he was able to support his 4 kids and his wife and truly live the American dream. And I'm very proud of that. But that was then. That was then. Here's what downstate Illinois looks like now. And the challenges we face that I think, while it's downstate, it's something that we should all be interested in, whether you're in Chicago or any place in our state. I think we should care about this. Sensata. When I first was running for Congress, it was 2011, and a story that was dominant in our region was about this plant called Sensata. They made, that's a little bit of the end of this story, but they made automotive sensors. And they had been in the town of Freeport, Illinois for decades. And what happened was Bain Capital ended up buying Sensata in a leveraged buyout. And what was not in Bain Capital's equation was to keep those jobs in the little town of Freeport, Illinois. And that had devastating effects. They didn't care that this was the heart and soul of this community, that Sensata did better alongside the community doing better. And the community really reacted to this. And it was a hard hit. It was something that I spent a lot of time with the workers who were about ready to lose their jobs, one of whom is a woman named Dot Turner. I got to be friends with her. I got to be friends with a lot of people. And Dot Turner started working at Sensata when she was 18 years old, fresh out of high school. And she's 61 years old in that picture when she was losing her job. So she had worked there for 43 years. And, you know, she wasn't lucky enough, like maybe some of us will or have been, where there was any kind of retirement party for her. There was no gold watch, the old proverbial gold watch, nothing like that. Rather, she spent her last days on the job at Sensata training her replacement worker who came from China and who would go on to make $1 an hour over there. And then her last hours, those were the last days of her job at Sensata, but her last hours, she spent on her hands and knees literally scraping the tape off of the floor that had been there to be the place marker for where the equipment went. That's what happened to Dot Turner. So, if you go south of there, there's a town called Galesburg, Illinois. And in Galesburg, 13 years ago this month, almost to this day, a plant called Maytag closed. And they sent every one of the 1,500 jobs to Mexico. And here we are a dozen plus years later. And in Knox County, where Galesburg is located, the wages still have not recovered in that county from the Maytag days. All right, I'm going to give you one more example, and I'm really just sharing this with you because I want you to feel a little bit of the pain that is happening in these smaller towns throughout Illinois. This is a plant called Robert Shaw, and it's in a town called Hanover along the Apple River. It's a very beautiful town. If you go from farther south and you're going to Galena, I know if you go to Galena, you're heading west on 20 to get there, but if you go to Galena from the southern part of our state, you pass right through this little town. It's a little curve. And Hanover only has 850 people. And Robert Shaw made these water valves that would regulate the water flow in things like dishwashers. And they had a near zero defect rate in their work. And the company that ended up buying them out was making very good profits. But they ended up closing that plant also and sending all of those jobs to Mexico. So I want to just lay that foundation so you understand the kind of congressional district that I serve and just how these towns can be thrown into chaos and the hurt that they go through. So this is, you'll see some of that when you go through my congressional district still. And so the people that I talk to and that I meet, and if you came down to my district or if you went to a lot of communities in southern Illinois or in downstate Illinois, you would hear that they're really tired of this kind of story. They're tired of seeing their jobs that are sent overseas. They're tired of training their foreign replacements. They're tired of trading in good jobs for $10 an hour service jobs. And they're also tired of looking into the future and really not seeing any future. And that's a little bit of the moral of the story. And while these examples that I gave you went back 13 years, this has really been somewhat of a slow burn recession for the last 30 years. So all of this really has had deep political implications. And I believe that if we don't start getting our policy and our politics right, the Democratic Party will be decimated. I really believe that. I think we have so much work to do. So I want to tell you a little bit then, why am I standing up here today? When I was first running, I decided from day one that I was going to focus on kitchen table issues. And I had a really tough race ahead of me. You know, it's a swing district. There was a sitting member of Congress, a Republican, who I decided to run against. And here's what I decided I was going to do. I'm a former reporter, so I love to talk to people. I love to listen to people. I love to get my hands dirty. I love to know people's stories because it's my background. And what I found out is that people really appreciated it if you just showed up and you just listened. So I wouldn't just go to chamber events, but I would go to places like cattle auction barns where the town might have 500 people. And I wanted to show that I would listen and that I understood and that I was going to fight to improve people's lives. So my first race, this is me on my election night on my first race. So I ended up defeating a sitting member of Congress by 7 points. And this is my second race, and I ended up winning that race 2 years later. The guy challenged me, who had been a sitting member of Congress, and I ended up winning that one by 11 points. And then notice the W, and we purposefully made sure that we picked that picture with that in the background there. But and I ended up winning last year in 2016 by 20 points. So Donald Trump ends up winning this district, but I win by 20 points. And, so I've gotten a lot of questions about, just how do you do that? And so the reason I think there were so many questions is this, all right? I'm going to give you, so I'm going from the 17th District of Illinois in Illinois to nationally, and this is what's happening. So if you see, those are all like little teeny squares, and those are all of the areas that went for Donald Trump in 2016, okay? And then those little squares there are counties, county by county, that flipped from President Obama 4 years earlier to Donald Trump in 2016. And the little blue ones that are ones that flipped the other way. So you see very, very few of the blue, right? And then for further perspective, where that's circled right there, that is my congressional district. Look at it in Illinois. It's like all those areas that flipped, or nearly all of them, are right in my congressional district. So we have 14 counties at 7,000 square miles. I won all 14 counties, 11 of which are almost entirely rural. And Donald Trump won all of those 11 counties. So we wanted to get that figured out a little bit more. And this tells a little bit of a story, and I know it's probably hard to see that a little bit in the back, but so this is an employment index that goes back to 2008, okay? This is the economic recovery, right? Pretty good recovery. You see that? But that is, the blue line is the cities. Okay, so that, right, so you feel a decent economic recovery, right? This red line down here, those are small towns, and that's rural America. So when I would go around my congressional district, you can see why when the message was, gosh, we just have to build off that success, don't we? I mean, think about that. We heard it all. You heard it up in Chicago all the time, right? On the Democratic side. On the Democratic side, we have to build on that success. Well, this is the result. And if you can't see the numbers, Democrats lost more than 1,000 seats post President Obama being elected till today. So this is why people wanted to know, what in the heck are you doing? So we listen to people, we talk to people, and we want to know about what's happening, not just in districts like mine, but what happened in states like Ohio and Michigan and Iowa and Wisconsin. And my friend Rick Jaskoka, who's here, who owns a company called Jaskoka Turman, it's a communications company, strategic communications company, went up to Wisconsin and wanted to find out, what exactly do voters think? And what in the heck happened? Why did you vote for President Obama 4 years earlier and President Trump this time? And if we can play that video, that would be great. It's only 2 minutes.
The Democratic Party always stood for making sure that people were safe and secure and had enough means to get by and everything else, which is great.
They just forgot that people here vote, and they lost total sight because they thought that they were winning, and before the election even started, they figured it was a shoo-in. That's where they lost it.
With what we deal with up in this area, I don't think anybody in Wisconsin coming out of Milwaukee or Madison, which is primarily where we see the Democratic Party coming, has a clue what goes on, north of Highway 10.
I think politicians in general do not understand our concerns or anything. It showed in their election this year, you know, really it did. It just, they don't listen to the average common person very well.
And they feel excluded up here. Everything seems to be centered around the big cities. And I know our populations are a lot lower, but they want to be able to be participants, and they don't feel that way.
They want people that are going to sit in a room and hash out the problems and make it work. They want somebody that can do it and actually put some common sense to it.
I expect the same thing, whether it's the town chairman and supervisors in our township or it's the President of the United States. Tell me what you're going to do and show me why I can believe that that's what you're actually going to do. You know, don't tell me what you're going to do and have a history that says you're going to do 18 other things.
If you got a boat in the water and it has nobody really running this boat, and the boat's just going to turn one way and go in a circle forever and ever and ever. And as far as I can see, the politicians are in this boat, and they're floating around, they're just going in circles. And us, the people, we're all in the water, trying to survive, trying to stay above water, and we can't get in the boat because they never stop us, let us on. And nobody's running the rudder because it just keeps going in the same circle all the time.
Come and talk to people, real people. Don't rely all on polls. Polls are fine, but come and actually meet with people.
So, I mean, I think that guy says it all. Think about, again, the election and where did some of the candidates not go? You know, when I talked about that cattle auction barn in a town of 500 people, I meant that. I go to those kind of places. So I don't think it's rocket science. And I have a role out at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee now called, I'm chair of the Heartland Engagement. And so I'm talking to candidates all over the country, and we started this new program called Build the Bench, where we are encouraging especially younger people and women and people of color to run, because that is where we are so underrepresented. But what I do is not really, I don't think it's overly complicated, and it's certainly not any rocket science. I'm going to share just a couple of those examples. So if anybody wants to run for office, steal these ideas if you're a Democrat. Steal these ideas because they work. First of all, it is showing up, it is listening, but we do something nearly every Saturday that we call Supermarket Saturday. And so I walk the aisles of grocery stores all over my congressional district, and you know, when I'm in the cornflake aisle, I'm stopping grandmas, and in the tangerine aisle, I'm talking to grandpas, and in the diaper aisle, I'm talking to young moms. But all I do is introduce myself. I say, I'm going to be flying back out to Washington, D.C. next week. What do you want me to know? And it is an open-ended conversation. I don't have media with me. I typically have one staffer in case we have to open casework, and we have a dialogue. And what's been interesting is that when I've been doing this since I was first elected, it used to all be about jobs and the economy. I mean, that was always the first thing out of people's mouths. And then after Donald Trump was elected, it was more about health care. That was the biggest concern. And just in August, during our district work period, the number one thing that people asked me about was, or told me to do, was get something done. They are tired of the lack of bipartisanship. They are tired of Democrats and Republicans not working together. They are tired of Trump being bad-mouthed. I tell you, there's not one person at any grocery store that I've gone to, not one, that said impeach Trump, not one who asked me about Russia, not one. They wanted jobs, the economy, health care, and get something done. So I do that, and I learn a lot. The other thing that we do is we call it Sherry on Shift, and all it is I job shadow people. It's I'll do my 53rd one of these this week, but I'm now a certified forklift driver. I have processed carp. I have delivered UPS packages. I have been a grocery store clerk. You name it, from mostly blue-collar jobs. But what I get out of that is I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with people who are just working hard to support their families. And I like to ask them, were you able to take a vacation last year? What do you do for fun? Because those questions get to people's discretionary income? Did you get a raise in the last year? And when you find out some people haven't gotten raises in 5 years, again, you understand that. So we've been doing those for a long time, and it guides us on our legislative agenda. It was through my Sherry on Shifts and through roundtable discussions with veterans that we have come up with some meaningful legislation. This is me signing a bill that looked at strategically placing these centers that would help small and mid-sized, especially small and mid-sized manufacturers, find overseas areas where they could sell their goods. We have another bill that came from our discussion with a group of veterans that when we found out that American flags can be made in China. Anybody know that? Isn't that like the sickest thing? I mean, I'm sure there are sicker things, but I mean, we just couldn't believe it. So we introduced legislation that said, if you're the federal government, at least if you're the federal government, you got to buy flags that are made in America. And we thought that was a pretty good idea. So that came from a Vietnam vet who gave us that idea. And so that is what has guided us. And now we're working on something that is called a better deal. And let me just give you a little bit of background on that. It was just maybe about a month or so ago that in my role as one of the co-chairs of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, we worked for about a half a year to figure out what do we need to do to be more successful as Democrats, and what do we need to do from a policy perspective, what do we need to do from an engagement perspective, and we rolled out this economic agenda. And when I told you that I'm sitting around that leadership table, this is what I've been focused on really for the last half a year of my career in Congress. But what the long and short of it is that we focus on jobs and the economy and not the issues that divide us. Things like rewarding companies as we look at tax reform that actually understand the importance of affordable and accessible child care, who understand that people should make sure that they can retire with some kind of pension or a 401k, and that people are paid a living wage, and that we reward companies that do that as opposed to having any kind of economic reward for outsourcing jobs. So that has really been our focus. Okay, let me find this thing here. So we might not have to talk about that had it not been for this complicated thing. I hate graphs, by the way, because it's not the way my mind works, but I want to share with you what this means. This shows that it used to be up until the 1970s that if you worked hard and you produced a product, that productivity and your wages rose at about the same rate. What this shows is that that doesn't happen anymore, and that if you work hard, you are not, and you produce a product, whatever that may be, you are not making the kind of wage that you would have back in the 70s. So wages are not going up with productivity, and that's a problem. So this is why we focused on this. You will not see, if you go to any of my events in my congressional district, I don't start out by talking about issues that divide us. It doesn't mean that my values are different than the vast majority of Democrats. It just means that these are the kind of things that we focus on. And when we look at this economic agenda, I know we have some people from transportation here, we need to pass a transportation bill. And we need to make it a robust one. I'm on the transportation committee. I'm on the aviation subcommittee, highway subcommittee, rail subcommittee, and water subcommittee. So I am in a good place to be at ground zero to help negotiate that. But you know, this is high-speed rail. We ought to be thinking about things like that. We need to be thinking about making sure that rural broadband is part of infrastructure. It's not just roads and bridges, but it is things like rural broadband. We have 23 million Americans in rural areas that don't have access to rural broadband. So that needs to be part of it. In our downtowns, making sure that, again, that we are rewarding small and mid-sized companies that create 2 out of every 3 of our new jobs. So in closing, this is just me stopping by and talking to people. I just think there's a heck of a lot more that unites us than divides us. It's probably partly because I come from a very bipartisan region of the state of Illinois, but it's also because I've worked in the private sector all of my life until this job where I'm now making a living in the federal government. But we truly need to think about what our own role is in making sure that we do our part to encourage bipartisanship, encourage working together for the good of our country. And I feel very blessed in how I was raised because, I figured that I had some level of success before I was elected. And I think that whatever I do in my future, I'll have some level of success. So I don't fear every single vote, and if somebody's going to be upset with me about that. Rather, my North Star is really making sure that we're doing right by the state of Illinois and that we're doing right by our country. So I want to say thank you, and with that, Ed, I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. When will we see President Trump's $1 trillion for infrastructure?
Ooh. Well, when Donald called me recently, I'm kidding. Well, I actually am going to say I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to get something done. Okay. Now, keep in mind, I'm like one of the least senior member of the Transportation Committee, but I'm just saying that because it's a committee, both Ag and the Transportation Committees that I serve on, I think we work really well together. We've got our Republican chairman out of the state of Pennsylvania is a good guy. We're held up right now over a desire for the chairman to privatize the air traffic controllers, something that I cannot get on board with, and that most people, I don't think there's enough Republicans and Democrats that are opposing that's a hang-up right now. But we not only need a $1 trillion transportation package, we need actually a $2 trillion+ transportation package. We really do. That gets us to a B grade. And that's a $2.4 trillion investment. We've got ways to fund it. That's obviously part of the differences, but it is something that's desperately needed. And believe me, as a downstater who travels to Chicago every time we come here and hit the traffic, it is something. And I know for those of you who live with that, want that as well. And for every dollar we invest in infrastructure, we get a $2 return. So it is truly a great investment in our future. The timing on it, though, is a little bit up in the air. The next order of business is the tax reform. I hope that we can make some meaningful tax reform that benefits small and mid-sized businesses. As a Democrat, I want to be viewed as somebody who values business, and I value organized labor too. So I am, to my core, I want to make sure that people can earn a decent living and all of that. But I also honor and have a great appreciation for businesses as well. And I think as Democrats, we need to embrace that more.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We have two questions here related to health care. One from Dave Lundy, a City Club member. What is the status of bipartisan cooperation on fixing the Affordable Care Act? And the other, a little more pointed question from Patricia Canessa with the Illinois Public Health Association. Her question is, health care access continues to be a major challenge for immigrants. Undocumented women can obtain a free mammogram in our state, but if they receive a cancer diagnosis, there's no resources available. What can we do to address this gap?
I think if we address two areas where I'm hoping that we can come together, that is the cost of prescription drugs. It's hurting way too many families. I have so many physicians who will tell me that they'll prescribe medication and people will either not fill it at all because they can't afford it, or they will take half the dosage to spread that out. And that's a terrible situation to be in if that's what's happening. And then number two, our premiums, our co-pays, and our deductibles are too high for way too many people. So I think those are the two areas where we ought to be able to come together, because the result of that is not specific to whether you're a Democrat or Republican. However, there was just so much rhetoric on the campaign trail for so long about this repeal and replace that I think that's what ended up happening. The bill that passed the House is a terrible bill that would knock more than 20 million Americans off their health insurance. In my district alone, that would have been 45,000 people would have lost their health insurance. In Illinois, we'd lose 60,000 jobs as a result of that. And so, I mean, just a terrible piece of legislation. But there's going to have to be a real desire for the leadership to be able to sit down and work that through. And right now, that's been a holdup. I don't know if I have a great answer for the person who can get a mammogram but then not get care, other than that, you know, hospitals, there's a lot of charity care. For those who work in healthcare know what that means, basically where care is given away and written off as a service to the community. And so I think if you're an advocate for people who fall in that situation, I think it's looking into how a charity care case can be opened. And I know that's not a long-term solution, but that would be a much longer and more complicated conversation than we have time for right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Congresswoman Bustos.
Thank you.
Next, from Chicago, Republican House Minority Leader Jim Durkin speaks at the City Club of Chicago and gives a review of the legislative session and the process to pass school funding reform and bills to combat gun violence in Illinois. Leader Durkin also talks about the growing bipartisan work in the House and Senate. This runs about 30 minutes.
Let me just say this. As the House Republican leader, I take an optimistic approach towards my position and also my vision for Illinois. I do this because I take this position very seriously, because when you think of it, I'm one of 118 members of the Illinois House of Representatives, and there's 59 members of the state Senate who are charged with representing 12.8 million residents of the state of Illinois. That's serious. And we need to be mindful of that and focus on that when we go to Springfield every day. It's not about us, it's about the people that we represent. It's almost 13 million people. And I hope that my members and my colleagues remember that on a daily basis. I try to do that. Now, for the many years that I have been in this position, I have stressed the following. As long as both sides of the aisle respect the priorities of each other, we can solve virtually any issue of importance before the Illinois General Assembly. In my years, I've seen many initiatives flame out time and time again over the decades. And quite frankly, it's kind of like the Bears in the red zone. And boy, they've got red zone problems, guys, and as much as we do. We have red zone problems in Springfield. So unfortunately, we're both in the same situation, but I think that we're going to probably move in a better direction than our friends over in Soldier Field. But let me say this. But the initiatives that have been presented have been one-sided, pushed through by the majority party, that were not in the best interest of the state of Illinois. These initiatives either failed or became bad law because meaningful input from the minority party was rejected. That attitude and brazen approach to Illinois government has been nothing less than an abject failure. That failure has resulted in higher unemployment, rising taxes, families and businesses fleeing the state of Illinois, and even worse, a lack of confidence in state government. But I hope in the last few years that we've learned a lesson. By working together with an open mind, we can fix the problems of our beloved state. Now let's take an example, the issue of public education funding reform. This particular issue has hung over the state capitol and in its hallways in the Capitol and the Stratton building for decades. Every legislator up and down this state, from Freeport to Chicago to Villa Park to Newton, where I was at last week, has stated that our state schools funding formula was broken. Now, in the past 5 years, bills drafted to change the funding formula routinely passed from the state Senate, only to be blocked in the House of Representatives by the House Democrat leadership, unfortunately. Now, this summer, we did pass a budget, not under the best terms, but we have a budget. However, that budget did not address how to fix our state's funding formula and left open the question on if our schools would actually get state appropriations. With state dollars uncertain, the daily threat of school closures and staff layoffs got loud and clear as the summer went on. No one wants that. We want our schools open on time. We want our children throughout the state of Illinois to have a quality education, no matter what the family income is or how rich or how poor their community is. A quality education that will create a foundation for success. A quality education that gives every child a shot at the future. A quality education that gives every child a chance to fulfill their hopes and dreams, to fulfill the American dream. And why not? Why not? I'm a very lucky person. I mentioned my family before, but the 8 of us grew up in West suburban Westchester, Illinois, in a very small house. My father was very successful, but my parents made great sacrifices for all 8 of us, incredible sacrifices. All of us went to the same grammar school, all of us went to the same high school, all 8 of us graduated from college, and 5 of us are practicing attorneys in the city of Chicago, and the other ones are gainfully employed. It's a joke and they're similar. But we were able to accomplish this, as I said, by the great sacrifice of our parents, but more so, the educational opportunities that were available to each one of us, and also because of that, the employment opportunities that the state of Illinois gave us, the Durkin family, has made us better people and ones that I know our parents are proud of. So I hope that this is what we can do for generations to come, and by making that very difficult decision in that tough bill that we just passed. Now, education funding has been a priority for Governor Rauner from the beginning of his tenure as governor. He created a task force that really worked hard to produce solid results. I want to applaud my colleagues. I'm not sure if they're here. I don't think they're here, but Bob Pritchard from DeKalb, Avery Bourne, who's from the Litchfield area, Sherry Jessel from Lake County, and Christine Winger from DuPage County worked tirelessly with members of this bipartisan, bicameral task force for months and came upon a bipartisan framework that was equitable to all districts across the state. Sadly, here we go, red zone, that seemed to be kicked. I will say that the work that that commission created was kicked to the wayside as session went along. Negotiations would start, stop through session and the summer. I was as frustrated as every one of my colleagues, but also everyone in Illinois, and was not going to let the summer pass without concluding this issue. It just wasn't fair to the parents, students, and teachers to let this continue. I raised this issue with the governor and told him that a solution can only come to fruition if the individual negotiators step aside and the 4 legislative leaders took control. He agreed with me, and we started our work in earnest with the leaders to drive the best deal we can. And for once, a deal that reflects Republican priorities, education priorities. The leaders met a number of times to resolve this issue. Senate Leader Brady and I were in constant communication with the governor and his education secretary Beth Purvis, who just left, but I wish she was here, but she was fantastic, and I wish her well in her next chapter of her life, but also the staff. But during these meetings, something very odd happened. These legislative leader meetings. Get this. We got along. We discussed the issues freely, and we actually negotiated in good faith for the first time in over 3 years. And in the end, we found the pathway to bring this extremely important issue to a negotiated conclusion. And yes, the priorities of both Democrats and Republicans were achieved. For the Republicans, we were able to achieve what was once thought to be impossible, bringing a scholarship program to help students and parents, allow them to make a choice in low-income areas for a better education for their children. Other Republican principles, such as unfunded mandate relief, charter school parity, property tax relief, were all included in this bill. All of these issues, at one time or the other, over the past many years, have been introduced and have never received a fair hearing. But they now are the law of Illinois. And I'm very proud of this work that we've done collaboratively between myself and also the Democrat leaders. We achieved an historic milestone, one which most observers didn't think could happen. So, for my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans who are here today and voted yes on Senate Bill 1947, that was the Education Reform Bill, thank you for your work, and please take a bow. And for those of you who voted no, remain seated. But that's not the only one we should be proud of this year, not the only initiative that we should be proud of. Just a few months ago, we also had another success that came to be through bipartisan negotiations. As everyone across the nation is aware of, our state, and specifically the city of Chicago, is plagued by gun violence, to the point that we are known across the nation for the murders that occur every day of the week in, week out. In 2016 alone, Chicago experienced 720 murders through handguns, 3,659 wounded from gun violence. That's just within the city of Chicago. What are we doing, and what are we not doing? But what I do know is the profile of those shooters who destroy neighborhoods daily, repeat gun offenders. This is corroborated by the men and women at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and also the men and women and the heroes in the Chicago Police Department. I've talked to him and Eddie Johnson about this. He testified in committee with me. He was shot and he was wounded in a gun battle many years ago. I served as a prosecutor at 26 California back in the 90s, and this is an issue that I take very serious. It's very important to me. Now, back in January, when we had the swearing in of the legislature, new legislature, I made a statement at the swearing in of this General Assembly, and I said that we must address the plague of gun violence, especially that it occurs from repeat gun offenders. And just like solving school funding, the crisis, Republicans and Democrat leaders, including the governor and the mayor of Chicago, we put partisanship aside to come to a solution that can reduce, that we believe will reduce, gun violence in Illinois, and specifically Chicago. Senate Bill 1722, which I was the chief House sponsor on, was signed into law in June, which will now give judges the ability to crack down on repeat gun offenders by meting out harsher penalties. I think it's good. Let these guys sit a little bit longer. Let them think about the consequences of their actions. Now, it sounds like it was an easy task, but it wasn't. It was a battle. And if any of you watched the debate in the committee or on the floor, I've been down there for a long time, and man, that was rough. That was real rough. But it was a difficult process with considerable pushback that I received from a variety of interests. But in the end, we got it done. I kept my commitment. For years, we've been trying to find a way to fix that problem. Again, it wasn't easy to find a solution that everyone agreed upon, but it was what compromise is all about. I wish I would have had more out of the bill, but the fact is the opponents didn't want much of it. But at the end of the day, we all agreed on something, and that's what compromise is about. And that's what adults do when you do have controversy or conflict. You compromise. And we've had two very important bills, two major public policy decisions where we as adults were able to reach a conclusion. Now, hopefully, in addition to seeing schools across our state treated equitably and fairly, we can hopefully down the future see a reduction in gun violence. Time will tell. And while these accomplishments are historic for Illinois, there is still a lot more that needs to be done. We are all aware that these bipartisan conversations must continue to make Illinois thrive again, and they will if we continue to have these conversations. In fact, today, the four legislative leaders, will be meeting again to discuss the future of our state. And I think that's good. It's very positive, and we need to meet more. If both sides are willing to work together, we can do great things. One thing that I'll bring up in the meeting is our need to do more with substantial and actually realistic property tax reform. I hear from every corner of the state that property taxes are hurting businesses and devastating homeowners, forcing out jobs and causing population decline. House Republicans will be taking that up this session because it is a priority for our party. And we want to make sure when we go to the table and we negotiate important issues that our priorities will be heard once again. And that's my commitment to my caucus and also to my constituents. Because I believe we've found a pathway. I'm not saying that we actually have completely broken the logjam, but I do believe that there is a light that is shining down on us. It's given us an opportunity to do things together in a collaborative manner. And I think at the end, I know, that is what everybody in this room and every Illinoisan has been looking for some time. Bipartisan accomplishments are not easy, but they are necessary to bring Illinois back on track. Now, one last note, and I think we'll probably have some Q&A. In the past week, we learned that Attorney General Lisa Madigan has decided not to run for re-election. I received many calls on Friday, and matter of fact, my phone blew up from friends, family, and also from my friends all the way in the back of the room, see them back there, asking me about my interest in the job. I was very flattered, and I still am very flattered by those wonderful comments. I served as an assistant attorney general. I know the office. It's a job that I think I would be suited for. However, in January, I was sworn in as the House Republican leader, and I gave a commitment to my members that I would serve this term as leader to do what's best for our caucus. And I plan to keep my commitment, and I will not be running for Attorney General. But with that being said, I am pleased to endorse today, who is with us, I believe will be our nominee, Erica Harold, for our Republican nominee for Attorney General. Erica, can you stand up? I've seen her. She works very hard. We're going to give her a shot. And I'm asking my Republican colleagues to support her as well. It's going to be a tough fight, but I'm with her 100%. So with that, folks, as I said earlier, I take my job with a certain level of optimism because I think we have to. Our jobs are too important to let issues fall to the wayside because this is a great state that all of us have thrived in, all of our children have thrived in, and one which we've got to make sure that generations to come will have the same opportunities that we have right now. So with that, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been, again, Jay, thank you, and thank you for allowing me just to speak for a few minutes. These are usually, the Q&As usually a little bit better, but again, I'm very humbled by the outpouring of support today. But all I got to say is let's wish the state of Illinois well, and we'll get better with a commitment by all members of the legislature to do that. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Durkin. And we have a number of questions.
Thank you.
I also want to recognize former State Representative Marlo Colvin, the Executive Vice President of ComEd. Marlo. By the way, Marlo is one of the #1 Cub fans. Yes. And whenever I look for him over weekends and that, the message is he's off in Cincinnati, St. Louis, whatever, bringing back the victory for our team. So thank you, Marlo. You've got a little more work to do. I want you to go up there and do something to those Brewers, okay? Great. We have a number of questions here. This is from Kim Godden with Superior Ambulance. I think they're sitting back there. Dan Proft has been critical of you on his morning show over the last several weeks. Any idea why he would be doing this? It seems strange because you are both good Republicans. It's a city club.
I didn't know that Dan Proft had a radio show. Well, I don't know.
was excellent. This question's from Don Davis with the Bronner Group. Don, where are you? Right down here. Good. Do you have any updates on the initiative to consolidate the numerous units of local government?
Well, the short answer is no. And it's been an issue that the governor has tried to develop over the last 3 years with the Lieutenant Governor Sanguinetti. But when you try to consolidate government, you run against enormous interests who are protective of their turf. Things have to change in Springfield. Let me just say this. You help me win 9 seats and we'll get there, okay?
Okay. This is from Committeeman Tim Egan, the head of Roseland Hospital. The Illinois Hospital Association just announced its plan to reduce Roseland Hospital's assessment funds by 83%. Will your caucus make sure any new assessment plan is fair?
Hey, Tim, what happened to the softballs? Jesus. Where are you at? Where are you at, Tim? All right. Yeah, Tim, we'll be fair. But there's only, just remember, there's only X amount of dollars to go around. We'll be fair, but the fact is we have to be mindful of the liabilities and the debt that we currently still have, which we have not fully addressed, in which I hope we will address at least a good portion of it. I know the governor plans to go out in the market to sell about $8 billion of bonds within the next 2 months, but that still leaves about anywhere from a $6 to a $7 billion hole that we have in unpaid bills. So when we start talking about whether it's cuts or it's going to be increases in any type of, these assessments, we have to be very careful. But Tim, will be fair. But I will say this, that we will be fair across the board. And everyone, I hope, will realize the situation that we are in, that we are still not in good times, but we will have, if we do the right thing over the next few years, we can get to a position where we can be, I think, more generous with the way in which we reimburse individuals for health care costs.
Okay, this is another health-related question from Jay Shannon, the head of the Cook County Hospital Systems. The Affordable Care Act can certainly be improved, but it got 1 million Illinoisans insurance, got us to the lowest uninsured numbers in modern history. Long question. What will the Illinois General Assembly do to assure continued coverage for all Illinoisans?
Well, this issue came up a few years ago, and I didn't support it because we didn't have the money to do it because under the ACA, the state was going to be taking on a greater responsibility of the cost. And at the time, we couldn't afford it. We still cannot afford it right now. I would hope that we can revisit the issue, but at this moment, there is no way in which we can predict how this is going to be paid down the line, because everything that our fears and our thoughts and concerns that we raised during the course of this issue are now coming to fruition. So I'm sorry, but I don't have a good answer for it. But it was something we could not afford then, and I don't think we still can afford yet.
Okay. Couple questions that I would like to ask. Number one, what do you think the state of Illinois should do, the governor, the mayor of Chicago, to try to bring a company like Amazon to Illinois?
Wow, it's a very topical question because the Lieutenant Governor, Leslie Munger, who is taking the lead on this, is currently in Seattle with a delegation from the city of Chicago. So I'm pleased to announce today that we're one of 50 states that's in the running. So that's very... We'll find out. I don't think we need to give away the store like Wisconsin just did with the billions of dollars they did for Foxconn, but we need to be competitive. I plan to meet with the governor over the next few days. This is one of the issues that I'm going to bring up. Look, we'll do whatever we can, but I do know that the competition is very heavy, and anytime you start talking about incentives, it brings out some of the worst in people down in Springfield. So, but we need to make a pitch. We need to be responsible. We can't oversell what we can deliver as well. And I think that's the problem when you have in these situations. You'll have states that are going to promise everything, but sometimes they come short, because when you do that, you make these promises. The legislature is the one who actually has to prove it. And it's usually the chief executive, it's the governor, who's going out and making the pitch. And there's no guarantee that a House or the Senate is going to buy into it. So as I said, when you make the pitch, be reasonable and don't oversell what you can deliver.
Some pretty good one-liners, James, you know. Okay. A number of members of the legislature have announced that they're retiring on both sides of the aisle. Your predecessor and our City Club Speaker, Christine Radonio. Just this weekend, Barbara Flynn Curry from the opposite side of the aisle. You mentioned Bob Pritchard and the Education Commission. He was on a panel that we did several months ago. What does this mean in terms of the future of government in Illinois and your leadership within the House?
A lot of those names that we just mentioned are hitting about 70 or they're over 70 years old. So I would just consider that natural attrition that we have in the House. That's something, I would say that's part of it. Patty Belloc we're lucky we had her. And Patty, thank you for the work you've done. Patty is a national expert on Medicaid and health care reform, so she's been an absolute, we've been fortunate to have her. But Patty has told me, I mean, just keeping her on this past term has been very difficult. She's got she's got grandchildren are scattered on the East Coast, West Coast, and I don't blame her. She says that, you know what, I've got to spend more time with my family. But that's a consideration a lot of the men and women had, is that they've done their service. They feel that they can't do any more. We have other members that I think have just unfortunately walked into the process and they felt that this is not what they're ready for and not something that they want to be part of. And I understand that. I respect it. But when people come into this position, it is not an easy job. It never was intended to be. And it's an extremely partisan environment. And I will say that what's happened over the past 3 years and the logjam and I think some of the antagonism, the stress and the anxiety that people have down there, it just wasn't working for them. So I understand that. So I would just say that while we are losing many outstanding men and women who have convinced themselves that they've made their contribution, other ones have decided that this is not the type of process they want to be in. And that happens every 2 years. But the fact is, we still need good men and women, and I encourage, we're going to be involved with another election over the next year and a half, but I still believe that this is one of the most noble causes and callings that you have in the state of Illinois, and that's to fix the state of Illinois. It's not easy. I'm in the minority party. I was in the super minority party 2 years ago, but we took ourselves out of it, and we've been able to negotiate and compromise on some pretty big issues, which I just discussed. But it's just a tough environment, and I respect people. I will not criticize them, but I respect any individual decision that they make and why they choose not to run for re-election. But as I said earlier, it's tough. Washington's tough, and I think we're seeing it in every area, whether in every state and every even local governments. It just gets more challenging. But again, challenges are what life is about, and that's what we need to be focused on. And I know my colleagues share the same feeling.
Thank you, Jim. We have a couple more questions. You gave your endorsement to the Republican candidate for Attorney General, and there's at least one Republican candidate that we know of running for governor. Any clues about who might represent the party for Secretary of State and, I believe, Comptroller?
No, I haven't. I know that the state party is actively recruiting to find good, committed individuals to run for those offices. And this, again, is part of the discussion I have with the governor. The AG race is going to be very exciting. I believe that Erica will be our nominee, and on the Democrat side, you're seeing everybody with a law degree is actually putting their name in. So let's see the chips fall where they may.